Hey, what's that sound?
Something big.
4 years ago, a movie captured the imagination of the entire planet.
Go as fast as you can.
On May 23rd, Steven Spielberg will take you to a world beyond imagination.
It's coming back!
The Lost World. This film is not yet rated. Starts Friday, May 23rd.
Hello, everyone. It's Brian the Brain here, and I'm your host this week of Pantheon Plus. And we continue our journey into the underrated sequels for the next 2 months. And this is my third pick on the list. I got one more coming up in a couple of weeks. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting pick because it's going to be very divisive. It's The Lost World Jurassic Park. Came out in 97. And I know I've been kind of building up to this because as soon as Jerome came up with the idea, I've been wanting to talk about this movie so much. I will defend this movie till the day I die, probably. But before we get into the movie, my co-host for this week is Jerome. He can be found on Twitter at JeromeC1985. And we ask you leave a 4 or 5 star review for the folks of the real world, so more people find the show and help discover us, and appreciate the work that we're doing here at the real world. So we appreciate that. Last week we talked about Gremlins 2. This week we talk about Jurassic Park 2. Man, like I said, I've seen this movie so many times, Jerome. I don't know. I just love this movie so much, and the plot is not that great, I know, and the third act is so, jarring and sudden. But it has that Spielberg charm, and the John Williams score is a little different. And I think I realized on this last viewing that the reason I love this movie so much, I think, is because it's kind of an ode to the original King Kong from 1933, which I love, and I own on Blu-ray, and I've seen it multiple times. So, yeah, I think that's what it is. But before we get into that, I'm going to mention really quickly again, I have some honorable mentions in the action comedy, or I would say the action adventure / comedy category. Lethal Weapon 3 and 4. I almost picked Lethal Weapon 3, but Jerome was like, I don't know. I feel like we'd have to watch Lethal Weapon 1 and 2 just to get into that mood. So it'd be kind of extra work, but I really like Lethal Weapon 3 a lot, and 4. And I love Die Hard with a Vengeance, Live Free or Die Hard. I actually thought about considering Jurassic World as well from 2015 because I think that was a good follow-up nostalgic sequel. The latter 2 movies after that were pure crap. But also I thought about Red 2, a more recent one with Bruce Willis in it. Escape from L.A., Rush Hour 2, Desperado, Bad Boys 2 and 3, all honorable mentions in this category. But I ended up sticking with Jurassic Park, The Lost World. This movie, man, really took over in 97 in terms of a lot of things. Do you remember the watches at Burger King by chance?
I know there was a ton of marketing material. And here's what I'm going to say, Brian. From here on, I have seen all of these sequels either in theaters or on opening weekends. So we are at a point where I am cognizant. I am seeing all of these movies on a consistent basis. So every sequel on our list from here on, I saw in theaters. I definitely remember seeing this in theaters because in 1997, when I was 12, it was not as common for me to be seeing this. So I do remember kind of being terrified by the first Jurassic Park. And but a few years later, 12 years old, this is definitely something that I was much more mentally prepared for, even though this is a much darker film in a lot of ways. So I will be very curious to kind of exchange our ideas. I do remember there being just a ton of marketing material. So I don't remember anything specific though, because I wasn't big into the extraneous merchandise. It wasn't a huge action figure collector or Pogs or things of that nature, whatever would have come out around this time.
Yeah, I definitely remember the marketing and the merchandising, and that's how I became aware that there was a sequel. I didn't even know there was a sequel until the marketing came out for it, and I was like, another Jurassic Park movie? And then next thing I know, like, because at the time I was really like into wrestling too, and just kind of like going back and forth between movies and wrestling. But at the time, like, it came out on VHS, and I was like, shit, I guess I really want to watch this. Like, how did I not see this in theaters? Because like I saw the original in theaters, but I guess I didn't even bother to ask my parents at the time, and I was just kind of like, oh, I'll just rent it. Because at that time I was renting a lot more than going to the movies around that era in the late '90s. But yeah, I do remember watching this on VHS with some other people, and just like, wow, man, this is a great adventure. And just that, I think it's part of that VHS nostalgia too, that maybe why I love this movie so much and watching it so many times on a VHS. But in terms of the budget, yeah, I mean, 73 million, gross 618 worldwide. And we talk about the marketing. They spent $250 million on the marketing campaign with like 70 promotional partners, which I mentioned the Burger King thing, and I remember the watches, but there was like JVC, Mercedes-Benz. I believe Jeff Goldblum got a free Mercedes-Benz as a tie-in to the movie, and I think he used it for like 10 years ago or something like that from what I read. So good for him using like that free car and using as much as he could. Timberlands. I remember like the arcade games at the time were getting way cooler, and they were more like the sit down kind with the gun. And I remember the Lost World game coming out and being like way better than the Jurassic Park game. So, you know, technology was kind of like evolving with the franchise at the time as well. So that makes sense in terms of like the video games. But yeah, this was interesting because I never read the books. I didn't care to read the books for Michael Crichton. I just knew it was based on a book. And then from what I heard growing up is like, oh, it's so different from the book that you don't even have to read the book, just watch the movies and you'll just enjoy it for the movies. But even after the first movie, like Michael Crichton was under pressure to release a sequel to the book, which there wasn't at the time. So in that 4-year span, he released the sequel novel. Spielberg at that time again was on that sabbatical because he did 2 of the greatest movies of all time in the same year, which is almost unheard of. So you know he obviously had to take a break. So he took 4 years off, came back with the Lost World, and I think it kind of fit for what he was trying to do, get back into that like popcorn, you know, type movie, family movie. I mean, Schindler's List, I mean, that's one of those movies that you can't really like watch multiple times. I think it's 1 or 2 times and that's it, because it gets so depressing and it just drains you sometimes, or it drains you when you watch it. So Schindler's List is an incredible movie, but I think this is definitely a change of pace. And then going back to the Jurassic Park stuff, I think this kind of matched what, or felt like that's what Spielberg should have been doing at the time anyway, going back to that. And I think he may have had some regrets because, during filming, he felt like, this is the actual quote: "I beat myself up, growing more and more impatient with myself. It made me wistful about doing a talking picture because sometimes I got the feeling I was just making this big silent roar movie. I found myself saying, is that all there is? It's not enough for me." So after this, he would do more meaningful stuff. Obviously, this would be his last Jurassic Park movie. But you could tell, like, because of the plot, it's not the usual Spielberg, like, storytelling, because this plot is very, like, basic. You know what I mean? They go to the island. They're trying to protect the dinosaurs. This other team comes in, takes a T-Rex off the island, takes it to San Diego, and shit goes crazy. That's the story. And it doesn't sound like a typical traditional Steven Spielberg story with all the twists and turns and the great arcs and character arcs and stuff like that. It kind of trades that in for like the effects and the visuals and all that stuff and the music, which I'm okay with, because in terms of that, I feel like the movie flows in this way where like I'm never bored ever in this movie in the 15 times I've watched it. So I think that's, I can see where Spielberg's coming from, because he feels like, okay, this is probably like, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore, which is understandable. And he goes on to do like Amistad, right? We mentioned that later. And then, after that was like Saving Private Ryan right after that. So I can tell like where he was as a director trying to transition out of this. But again, I'd still like he did a great job with like the visuals and stuff like that. And I mentioned the King Kong tie-in, like it does have that King Kong vibe where they bring the T-Rex out from the island to the, public. But the name of the boat that actually is transporting the T-Rex is named the SS Venture, which is the same boat that it is from King Kong in 33. So I didn't even learn that until recently. So I was like, God, no wonder I love this movie so much, is because it reminds me of King Kong.
Yeah, I know that you are a much bigger fan of things like Godzilla and King Kong. Like, I know one of the things that you wanted to do was to actually have a theme dedicated to Godzilla, and that was never going to be like the kaijus and the big animals destroying cities. Like that's not really my thing. So I think that's clearly something that Spielberg felt like he had to do. I think the biggest thing is Jurassic Park 1993 is one of the greatest movies that has ever been made. It's on my list of 100 favorite movies of all time. I mean, it is everything that Spielberg is as a director. And I mean that in the best possible way in terms of like big blockbuster direction. And I mean, look, I think Jaws and E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark are almost unimpeachable. But when you get down to it, like the essence of who Steven Spielberg is like he has an interest in character. He does a tremendous job with visuals. He always has John Williams there. This is a movie that he is grossly overqualified to direct because at the end of the day, this is a B movie. And all of the Jurassic Park movies following the first one have all been B movies, even though they have huge budgets, big stars. I think they're all B movies. And I think that there are a couple of very good scenes in this movie that we will discuss, I hope. But I think that where this movie falters for me is in the fact that Dr. Ian Malcolm is almost a completely different character in this movie compared to the first one. I think that's one of the biggest problems. I think we trade in 2 kids for 1, and I don't think that works out either. I think there are some interesting ideas in here. One of the things that you mentioned as you were watching this most recently is the idea of this movie has kind of a Quint-like character from Jaws, which I think is a huge positive. Like, I think having that kind of character in this movie is a big positive, but it just feels like they run out of ideas, so they have to leave the island. They release the dinosaur into San Diego for like 15 minutes. Like, the dinosaur is in the island for like a hot minute, and then it immediately goes away. And it's really, really strange. And I can see why Spielberg never ultimately returned to this franchise. And for me, I am not going to sit here and tell you that Jurassic Park 3 is a good movie, but I think in a lot of ways I would prefer to rewatch that movie compared to this one in terms of enjoying it, because this movie is over 2 hours long, and it feels like, well, because Spielberg is involved, because this is a sequel to one of the biggest and greatest movies of all time, we have to make this movie 2 hours. And I don't think it ultimately falters in a lot of ways, even though there are certainly some very good moments, there are some good performances, and there are definitely some things about this movie that work. I don't hate this movie, but I also don't love it. I just think there's a lot of problems.
That's fair. And, when you mentioned Dr. Malcolm having that change, I think what it was is that he's with his daughter now. So with the daughter being around, I don't know. It's just like when you're hanging out with your homies, right? And they're dads, but they're acting like 20-year-olds when they're around you. But then when they're around their kids, they suddenly become that 35-year-old dad that they have to be, and they have to be a totally different person. I've seen that with my cousins. So I think that's what's going on here, and that's why people are like, this is not the same Ian Malcolm. But the Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park did not have his daughter around. And having your daughter around changes you as a person and the way you're going to act in front of everybody. So I think that's
even
kind of
in the scenes when he's not with his daughter, he feels like he's behaving a bit differently. And I have said this many times. I think Jeff Goldblum is tremendous in supporting roles when he can just be like, he's the spice that you put on top of something. Like Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park 1, even in Jurassic World Dominion. Like, I think that is the best possible version of this character, because you don't really have to invest in him. Like, even in Thor Ragnarok, like, that is the Jeff Goldblum that I want to see. Independence Day. But when you get into him having to be a romantic lead, or when you have him in a movie like this where he is kind of the character you're supposed to be most invested in, or even in the Independence Day sequel, which that will not be on our list. Brian, complete sidetrack. Have you ever watched the Independence Day sequel?
I never, ever, ever, ever will, because they killed Will Smith off camera, which we talked about in that stupid, well, not trope, but we mentioned it when we talked about Nightmare on Elm Street killing off the main characters from the previous
Brian,
movie.
we have to find a pretext for you to watch the Independence Day sequel because it's so bad. And Jeff Goldblum is God bless him, he's tried, but I feel like it's not as bad here. But I feel like a lot of the same problems exist in that he has to become much more of a leading character as opposed to kind of a side piece. And I think that is where his strength is. And I would say that about a lot of the people in this movie. I think that Vince Vaughn doesn't really get to be funny. That doesn't work. But I mean, someone like Richard Schiff is perfectly cast. I think Julianne Moore is fine. But there is somebody who they did cast, Brian, who I think was a tremendous choice. And I will let you talk about him first because I know that you are a big fan.
Are we talking about Pete Postlethwaite as Roland Tembo? Because
yes.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Quint from Jaws is like my top 3 favorite characters of all time. I'm staring at the pop right now that I got a year ago for like $20, and now it's worth like 60, so I'm proud of that fact. But Quint is one of my all-time favorite characters, and up until recently, I just realized that Spielberg is recreating that feeling with this Roland character. And it's clear because he's talking like Quint. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you picture Quint sitting in that chair in the car trying to pronounce dinosaur names, I could totally see him throwing the fucking booklet out the door and just be like, the one that looks like Elvis, we're going for that one. And, you know, that's Quint. You know what I mean? And I love this reinterpretation or redux of that character because Quint is one of my all-time favorite characters. So it works so much for me. And he's such a great job in this movie. His I wouldn't say monologues, but he has long extended dialogues that very, like I mentioned last week, Peter Cushing, you know, berating someone intelligently in like a monologue. That's what he does here, man. And it's just, he does it in the car. He does it to some of the men, and he does it at the end. But like, yeah, he's a great character. I just wish that they brought him back for the third act, but I'll get into that in a second because there's some notes on that. Because some people disappear from the third act, but I thought he did a great job when he was on the island and being that leader. And, you know, he did not, obviously him and Vince Vaughn are like two different parts or different parts of the spectrum in terms of like what they want out of nature, because he's a hunter and Vince Vaughn's character is like this naturalist that's trying to sabotage these like captors of animals and stuff like that. And that's what he's known for. So they really don't like each other, but somehow like he's able to like, you know, work together with him in order to survive. So that shows you the character that he kind of has. And he doesn't even like his own boss that's hired him for it. So it shows you like he's not really there. It's more of like he's there just to hunt the T-Rex, which I get. You know, I understand. It's all about, you know, him being the ultimate predator because he thinks humans are the ultimate predator, and the ultimate predator needs to hunt the ultimate animal predator, and that's the whole kind of thing. And it's kind of like it's very much Kraven the Hunter-esque, and I kind of want that out of a Kraven the Hunter movie interpretation, which I don't think we're going to get, unfortunately. I think we're going to get something totally different. But when I see this character, I think that's Quint, and that's, you know, Kraven the Hunter, and that's what makes this movie work for me so well, is this guy's just like bringing this performance that you know, everyone's having fun on this movie, let's say, but he's bringing this serious performance to the movie that, you know, because like even you got like Peter, what's his name, Peter Stormare, who's a great actor in his own right. He's played the devil in Constantine, but in this he's just there, and he's not even needed, and he's a great actor, and he's just there. But you can tell in his performance he's not even trying. So I was kind of like, oh, that's disappointing. But you know, you look back and they didn't even need his character, Peter Stormare's character. But you got, you know, Roland over here doing like the Lord's work, and it just sticks out a lot. And I mentioned like in like the little note that I wanted to mention is that, you know, the whole San Diego thing, they added that last minute. Like if you look at the time, but when they're done on the island, it's like an hour and 48 minutes, which is almost the exact runtime of Jurassic Park 3. But Steven Spielberg was like, you know what? I really want to see the T-Rex in the open in the city. It would be too much fun not to do. So they did it. And this was weeks before. So they kind of shoehorned in that third act. I think the movie was going to end with them on the island. I think they was going to kill the T-Rex and that was it. But then Spielberg changed it. And now they added this stuff. And they had some exterior shots of San Diego, shot in Burbank here in the San Fernando Valley where I'm from. And I've been in Burbank a lot. And I can kind of tell that Burbank look. So, yeah, I thought it was cool that they recreated the blockbuster and everything, and that had a big pop out of me. But what I think happened is that the reason you don't see Vince Vaughn and Pete Postlewaite is that because they added the third act so late that they were probably just done filming, thinking they were done. And then they were like, you know what, let's add this in San Diego. Let's bring Julianne Moore back. Let's bring back Jeff Goldblum. We don't need Vince Vaughn, but I think Vince Vaughn would have added something to that third act because he contributed a lot, whether or not he realizes it, to the plot where he unintentionally got Richard Schiff killed. And if you notice, like, if they never go to that T-Rex and fix his leg, like, Richard Schiff would probably still be alive in the movie. So I blame his death on Vince Vaughn for sure. And then, there's some other things that he takes the bullets out of the gun from Roland, right? So he doesn't kill the T-Rex, and Roland is like, shit, what are I gonna do? And then he shoots him with tranq darts. But if he didn't take out the bullets, say he didn't take out the bullets, and Roland shoots the T-Rex and kills the T-Rex, what does that mean? The T-Rex doesn't go to San Diego. And in San Diego, he doesn't eat the dog. He doesn't eat that human. He doesn't kill the people on the boat. So in essence, what I'm saying is Vince Vaughn's character is responsible for a lot of deaths in this movie. So maybe it's a good thing he wasn't in the third act, but if you're wondering why he wasn't there, that's kind of my theory, is that they just kind of added this third act on, and that's why some of the main characters kind of disappear after the island.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that such a stupid action leads to the best scene in the movie. For me, the best scene in the movie, and of course it has nothing to do with the characters, is when they're kind of dangling from the vehicle. It's just very harrowing. It's just well shot. It's Spielberg at the height of his powers. Like, he is the director that you want to create such a harrowing scene, and it's just really unfortunate that as an audience member, I'm not as invested in the characters, because I think that would have made the scene even better. But just from a technical execution standpoint, like, this is what you want out of your blockbusters. Like, you want people to feel the tension, you want the drama, and that's what this movie does. And it has stakes because one of the characters is ultimately killed because of it. So it's a very strange thing. This is just a weird movie all the way around. Like, you kind of have John Hammond in kind of a throwaway cameo. You have the kids from the first movie, and I get you don't want to put those kids in peril again, but it's like you had these characters from the first movie just kind of popping in for like 2 minutes, and then that's it. And you don't have Sam Neill, you don't have Laura Dern, so really the only character that really returns and is a major part of the movie is Ian Malcolm. And again, I like Jeff Goldblum as much as the next guy, but in terms of the way that this movie functions compared to Jurassic Park 3, Sam Neill is a much better lead for a Jurassic Park movie than Jeff Goldblum is, even though I prefer Ian Malcolm as like a side character. I think in terms of the lead, I mean, I just think Sam Neill is the better choice, and maybe he would have even been the better choice to return in The Lost World. But yeah, that's kind of where I come down on this movie. Like, it's really weird. It's a really strange movie. Jurassic Park 3 is also very strange because Laura Dern has like the same role as John Hammond does in this movie. But again, like, I think a lot of the stuff on the island is just very well executed and well shot. I do like the fact that it has a very different feel compared to the first Jurassic Park in terms of kind of the look of the island, like the fact that things are a little bit wilder, things are not as under control. Like, things are kind of in control in Jurassic Park at times, and that's when the chaos starts. Here it's just kind of chaos from the start. And I think the other thing is that the InGen stuff was kind of in the background in the first Jurassic Park, but they move it to the forefront in this movie. It is very much at the forefront in the 3 sequels. And boy, do I just not care about corporate espionage and corporate stuff. It's just fundamentally, to me, that is not what makes the first Jurassic Park good. And again, it's in the background in the first movie, but that's where it belongs.
Yeah, and this, I feel like at least they got their comeuppance a couple times. They got their comeuppance, like in the middle of the movie when Vince Vaughn released the dinosaurs they captured, and they just destroy the camp. I was like, oh, that was great, because that asshole boss deserved it. And then at the end with the T-Rex, and then, I guess he was the one that did break the baby T-Rex's leg, the boss guy, and then he ends up getting his leg broken, and then eaten by the baby T-Rex later on. So that was a good, like, full circle thing for me. But I think in this one it was just all about, like, they're gonna try and do all they can, but we we know as the audience that they're the assholes and they're wrong, and like, oh my God, they're taking these dinosaurs off the island, they're doing the wrong thing. So it's always been that thing that InGen's always been the bad guy. I would say it's more obviously more in the Jurassic Kingdom movies, but in this case, I think he was fine for what it was because they got their comeuppance. But let's get into the main plot really quick. We kind of mentioned some of it, but at the beginning of the movie, John Hammond, Richard Attenborough, the legend, Richard F. Attenborough, I texted you, Jerome. I wish he was in more of the movie, but of course he was limited based on his health at the time, and he only had the scene at the beginning, and then the little cameo, or not the cameo, but the little news bit at the end about him like revealing to the world that the island does exist. But he's asking Malcolm to go to Site B. Site B is not the same island as the first movie. It's this island where they bred the dinosaurs and then brought the dinosaurs to the main island. And I think in theory, that actually makes more sense because if you got all the dinosaurs on one island, that could be a problem. But they split them up so you have less dinosaurs on. If you can tell, like there was less dinosaurs on the Jurassic Park island, and there's way more here because this is the island where they actually bred them. So I thought that made a lot of sense in terms of the Site B thing. And you know that Hammond's asking Dr. Malcolm to do a photo record of the island so that he can go public with it, and then try to make it like a nature preserve or whatever, because he knows InGen wants to just take the dinosaurs off the island. He doesn't mention that at the beginning, but he knows that's what's going to happen, and he wants them to go in first. And then the problem is he recruits Sarah, his Dr. Malcolm's girlfriend. The problem is she goes off on her own to the island way before everyone else. And then, you know, Malcolm thinks like, you sent her there. You're manipulating me. And he thinks he's like being manipulated, which is totally justified. But then you find out Sarah did it on her own accord. And she's just so naive and overzealous. And I'm just like, oh man, you have no idea. And then this is where he gets interesting because, like, you know, he meets Vince Vaughn and Richard Schiff, and then they go to the island, and then his daughter sneaks on the trailer, and she's on the island as well, and he's pissed off, and he's telling everyone, we need to get off this island. You have no idea how much danger we are in. And everyone just like, oh, you're being over dramatic. Whatever. I'm gonna stay here for 5 or 6 days. And he's like, you're going to be good 5 or 6 pieces when you come back, dude. Like, he was right. And I feel like I relate to this so much because, okay, a little sidetrack, but when PWG went to the Globe, right? This is a little wrestling side thing. I knew it was not going to be the same. And everyone, when they first went to the Globe, was like, oh, we got so much foot room now. There's air conditioning. But then as the years have gone by, everyone, including myself, like, that I've known, you know, everyone, including myself, have noticed that the quality has slightly gone down at the PWG shows because it doesn't have that atmosphere that a smaller building that the Legion Reseda Hall had. And no one listened to me. And now all my PWG friends are like, man, Brian, you were right. And I'm like, no one listens to Brian. And I'm thinking like, no one listens to Dr. Ian Malcolm when he's telling you in the first movie that this is a bad idea. And at the beginning of this movie, he's telling everyone this is a bad idea. And no one is listening to him. So I totally relate to this. And I'm just like, man.
So what you're saying is that the Globe is the equivalent of Site B and Peter Ludlow is Super Dragon. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's what it feels like. And coincidentally, I am going to Bola today on the day of this recording. But man, no one listens to Brian sometimes. And I say these things because I think these things out and I see things years ahead of time playing out. And then, you know, it's 2018 or 2019 and my buddy's like, yeah, but we got foot room now. We can move around. And I'm like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. And years later, he's like, man, you were right. It's not the same anymore. It feels like a regular indie because of the lighting and you know what I mean? Like, no one listened to me. So I relate to that idea of being the rational thinker and everyone's just kind of like, no, we got to do this. We're going to do this. And we're going to stay here and endanger our lives. So,
I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing with this movie is that I understand that Jurassic Park was a huge movie. And from a logical standpoint, like, you want to make a sequel. Like, I get that temptation, but it's one of those things. Like, just like in the first, like Ian Malcolm even says it in the first movie, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And they could make all these sequels and make billions of dollars, and that's great. But should they have? And I would argue that just like the Ghostbusters, there is no sequel that has ever justified its existence relative to the original. And I just feel like there is something in the first movie baked into it that is so special that, I mean, Spielberg tried to do it. He couldn't even do it himself. Joe Johnston, at least he went for kind of a B movie feel. So I definitely appreciate that Joe Johnston was at least understanding what he was going for. On the other hand, like Colin Trevorrow, I mean, the Jurassic World sequels, with the understanding that they're huge successes, from a creative standpoint, those movies are complete disasters. And again, with this movie, at least you're getting some of the craftsmanship. At least I think you're getting the spirit of some of those old school horror movies. But again, in the end, this is, just as the third one, a B movie. This one just happens to have Steven Spielberg involved.
Yeah, and it's going back to that King Kong, vibe they were going for. That's why the look's different. It's a darker, like, tone of color, which I actually like, because I'm usually the one that's like, I don't like the colors in this. I'm usually the one complaining about the colors, but I think it works in this because it makes it feel like a natural world separated from the actual world, that it's just this isolated island. And because of the look, it actually, enhances the visuals for me. So I think that works. And then, later on in the movie, Engine comes with the second team, and that was Hammett's fears that they were going to come in and try to take the dinosaurs off the island, and that's exactly what they're trying to do here with Roland as like the lead hunter, and you have the Engine boss Peter Ludlow. So to me, this is like the Jaws mayor and the Jaws hunter dynamic. You know what I mean? Like, he's the mayor who's making obviously some bad decisions that are endangering people's lives, and then you got the hunter guy who's like, I'll kill him for 10. Whatever. So yeah, I get it. Like, that dynamic, he's recreating it, and I like that a lot. And I think having a Quint type character in the Jurassic Park universe, like, they tried to do that in the first one, believe me, but it didn't really like come off as Quint, because that guy was just like outsmarted immediately. You know what I mean? And they got killed by the raptors. So in this case, he actually lives and gets the prize, but he doesn't kill the T-Rex because of the bullet switch from Vince Vaughn. But yeah, then later on, Vince Vaughn comes in, sabotages the camp, because he's one of those like saboteur kind of people that Hammond knew about and hired him to do so in case this does happen. And it did happen. The problem is, again, causing, he has the right idea in mind, I guess, but causing chaos, because it destroys the satellite phones. They have no way to communicate with the outside world. So they're fucked, and they have to go to the actual comms or place, whatever, on the original, part of the island that was inhabited by the humans when they were there. And then they have to go all the way across the island to get there in order to stay alive and communicate with the outside world, to get off the fucking island. So again, Vince Vaughn, he has these nice intentions, right? He saves the dinosaur with a broken leg, but it cost him his friend's life. He goes in and saves these dinosaurs. It cost him the satellite phones, and probably some men died that night too as well. So Vince Vaughn, I feel like, is just like this, I don't know, like, does not like this, tool of chaos or whatever that he doesn't realize he is. But then he disappears in the third act, like I mentioned, because they tacked that on, and he was probably done filming anyway. So, yeah, then it goes on to them, trying to survive together. And then, this is where, because they bring the dinosaur back and they fix the leg, but then all of a sudden the two T-Rexes come and kill Richard Schiff in the most brutal way, because let's face it, this dude was like probably the biggest hero in the movie for what he did for those three people dangling for their lives. Like, still like trying to like tie the rope around the tree stump, while also trying to tie the rope from the car to the trailer to pull the thing back. And the poor guy keeps slipping and the ropes keep falling apart, yet he's so much like trying to maintain and keep calm and maintain and save them. You know what I mean? He never freaks out at any point until the dinosaurs come or the T-Rexes come to kill him. But man, I thought this is one of the most heroic things I've seen. And he dies for it, man. And it sucks, and I wish they let him live, because I felt like that was the most heroic thing in the movie, and he died for it. But I guess that's kind of like the sacrifice of it all. And Malcolm and them kind of mention it, but they're not really distraught, which I found kind of like, oh, you're not really like sad about it. But then you look at the deaths in Jurassic Park in the first one, and whenever someone died, there wasn't like this like emotional outcry from the characters. I think that would go later on and do that in like Jurassic Kingdom or Jurassic World or whatever. But yeah, I thought that was really funny. And then, of course, the trailer thing happens. And that's actually one of the few things they took from the Michael Crichton sequel book. that the two trailers were dangling at the edge of this cliff, and Spielberg read that and was like, "Oh my God, we got to film that." So that's probably one of the things that drew him into this movie, was doing that sequence. And you mentioned how it's a totally perfect Spielberg sequence at the height of his powers, and I'm always going to remember that scene and the glass breaking, and every centimeter that she moves, like the glass is breaking underneath her, and that way it was shot, it was just amazing. Because I'm not sure how you do it, but you would have to put the set vertical and place everything vertical, but then you would have to make sure with it, when you destroy the trailer, you don't permanently destroy it, because you have to flip it vertical for later shots. I don't know how they did it, man, but I thought it was tremendous, because it was all real sets and very little like the only CGI was probably the glass breaking, but just a tremendous scene, and I think it's one of the best scenes in the whole franchise. You know, like Welcome to Jurassic Park or whatever, like some of those iconic scenes. This sticks out a lot because of the way it was shot. It was just so dramatic. And I think Spielberg's great at doing that, like, dramatic build-up and tension like he does in Jaws. And he's doing that here, and he does it with the Raptors later on. So yeah, they meet the other team, and they have to work together to get off the island now. And then a few minutes, or about, I don't know, 15 minutes later, the T-Rexes come again because they're hungry again. And they go through the camp, and everyone like freaks out and runs. And I love Dr. Ian Malcolm telling him, "Hey, don't move, don't move." And everyone's just like running around. He's like, "Oh, fuck it, I'm running." And then they're all running away. And then once you see the tall grass, I'm like, "Whoa, tall grass, huh?" And they start going through it, and I'm like, "Uh-oh, something's going to happen." This is the first time I watched it when I was a kid, going through my head, like, something's going to happen here. And the Raptors come in the dark, and you can't see them. And listen, we've complained on Superhero Pantheon, especially about action sequences happening at night. And a lot of the action sequences happen at night in this movie. But I feel like the way they shot it, kind of like, you know, the Two Towers. And that's kind of like the go-to in terms of shooting at night, right? The big battle at Helm's Deep. And it felt like they did the same thing here, because the way it was lit at night, especially that raptor stuff in the tall grass. I don't know if you noticed this too, Jerome, but it felt like they did the spotlight thing, where they had this big white light, maybe a little yellow tinted light, 30 feet in the air, providing this, you know, basic lighting for the night. And the way they shot it actually worked, because you could actually see what was going on.
Yeah, I will say that if I do, whatever criticisms I have about this movie, at the very least, I could say I was able to see everything that was going on, and that's really that's what counts. And I will give them a tremendous amount of credit for doing that, for allowing me to actually see what is going on. So that's really all I can say. So I want to point out that the Vanessa stuff, I want to talk about Ian's daughter. It's really weird, man. It is really, really strange, just the way that all goes down with Vanessa. So they point out that Vanessa is not doing, like, she's in gymnastics, but kind of got cut from her team. And the fact that she gymnastic kicks a dinosaur out a window is almost one of the worst things that I've ever seen in one of these movies. This is right up there with the talking dinosaur in Jurassic Park 3. I'd forgotten about this moment until I saw it again, and it just made me mad. Like, I understand what they're trying to do with Vanessa, but the other thing that's weird to me is that she's a young black kid, and it's never addressed why, like, it's never really addressed, talked about in any way how she relates to having a white father. And just fundamentally, the relationship doesn't work. I also don't think her performance is that great either. It was a huge miss for me. And part of the problem is, like, I am supposed to invest in the idea that we have another kid on the island, and boy, it just doesn't work.
See, that's where we kind of like go on opposite sides. Like, I really like her performance, because if you look at the dialogue she's given, she's talking exactly like Ian Malcolm as a kid. And I always pictured, like, if Ian Malcolm had a kid, he or she would be a smartass, and she's a total smartass, and he doesn't know how to handle it, because he knows that she is a very intelligent person for her age, and he knows that. So that's the dynamic that works for me, is because Ian Malcolm is this smartass himself, right? But when you have a smartass daughter who's bringing it back at you, you don't really know how to respond, because you don't know, like, who's the dominant person in this conversation, because she could easily take over that conversation and be the dominant one, and she kind of does when she's like, you know, like, giving these subtle insults to her father at the beginning of the movie. And I'm like, wow, those are some cheap shots. Like, how come you always run away when I need you or whatever? And how come you're like so unreliable and you never keep your promises? And then he has no answer for it, because I think deep down, his character knows as a father that she's right, and there's nothing he can answer about it. So I love that dynamic between the two of them, because she's almost equally as smart, I think, for her age to Dr. Ian Malcolm in terms of like maybe emotional intelligence or something like that. But like, she seems very on point to his level. And it, to me, when I see those two talking to one another, I'm like, oh, they're clearly father and daughter. Like, to me, I've always had that feeling whenever I watch them talk in the beginning of the movie, and then when she sneaks on the island, because he's like, get out of here. You need to leave. We're having this like adult conversation. And then as soon as she leaves, like, no, 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 what are you doing? Get back in here. There's dinosaurs outside. So that inconsistency about him being smart, the smart ass of the group, and him being the father and having that struggle and trying to protect his daughter throughout the whole movie. I thought it worked really well for me, because like their relationship really works in terms of like, if she was not having that dialogue, or the kind of dialogue that she had with him, and it was just like this basic, you know, typical daughter dialogue type stuff, then it wouldn't work for me. But the fact that she's coming back at him intelligently with all these jabs and stuff like that, and like, I don't need to know about the mom. Sometimes you really don't need to know about that. Sometimes it's just the daughter and the dad having the relationship. That's fine. And I kind of appreciated the fact that they didn't really ask like, so wait, the mom's black or whatever, and like they didn't make it an issue. So I was really cool with that, because you know, as a biracial person, you know, you kind of see things in movies and like, oh, they're gonna have to acknowledge the fact that they're half whatever, and then that's gonna become 2 or 3 lines of dialogue and talk about it. In this case, they didn't, and I was like, oh, this is, you know, great. It's just normal. Like, it's a normal thing to have a black daughter, when you're a white father, and then, yeah, so what? You're the mom's black, so what? So to me, that's kind of like a plus for me, because like as a biracial person, I'm so used to the fact that they have to bring it up and like, oh, you're half white or you're half whatever in movies or whatever, and they make it a thing. In this case, it's just normal, and I like that fact a lot. In terms of the gymnastics thing, yeah, that doesn't work at all, because the fact that when she starts doing the gymnastics, the raptor's like on the ground, so it's like, what is she doing? And then all of a sudden the raptor's on top of the pipe. It's like she knew the raptor was going to be on top of the pipe at that exact moment. So of course that's what kind of really throws it off for me in that sequence. But once they get off the island and they go to San Diego, they kind of have more fun with it. They do the King Kong thing. You see the dinosaur eat the fucking. Oh man, I felt bad when the dinosaur eats the dog, man. Every time, or when the T-Rex eats the dog. But I feel bad. I always feel bad for the dude at the Blockbuster. I think it was the Blockbuster he got eaten out, or it may have not been the Blockbuster. But a Blockbuster does get destroyed, and there's like a fake Tom Hanks movie. Did you notice that in the background? And then of course one of his next movies would be starring Tom Hanks, right? So I thought that was a nice little tie-in from Spielberg, and just him having fun, and I enjoyed that. The only thing that I wanted to see that we did get to see is the T-Rex destroying people on the boat, because apparently it looked. I mean, from what we saw in this PG-13 level version of it, we hardly got to see anything. But I think what I read was there was a deleted scene where the T-Rex goes off and just destroys people, like eating them up and just like violently. But we never got to see it, and I kind of get why, because of the tone. But that was something I really wanted to see as a kid, because when I see that arm hang on the fucking wheel of the boat, I'm just thinking like, man, what the hell happened there? Because it makes you think of like, you know, when you see the hand from Jurassic Park. So yeah, a little tie in there, and I like that. And of course, they lure the T-Rex back to the boat with the baby T-Rex, and then Peter Ludlow gets killed, and then they send the thing off, and then sort of a happy ending, and then you see Sarah and Dr. E. Malcolm just like knocked out on the couch, because after all the shit they've gone through in this movie, they deserve a nap. And the daughter's just eating popcorn, and then we see John Hammond on the TV saying we need to protect these creatures. It is true that we have dinosaurs, and I did create them. And yeah, and of course the character would pass away and then lead into the events of Jurassic World and Kingdom and all that. But yeah, this was kind of like John Hammond's official farewell, right? Because he wasn't in the third one. So that's the last time we see John Hammond in the franchise. But I would say it's a good way to go out, because it kind of, he's playing that, you know, like kind old man kind of role. And, you know, at this time, I think he just did Miracle on 34th Street remake. So he was definitely doing the old happy old man gimmick. And this was him kind of like saying farewell to everyone. And I thought it was a good farewell for the character.
Yeah, I think it was appropriate in some ways, even though he's not a very good person. I would say, like, if you assess and look at what he's done, like he's maybe not the
Well,
greatest
according
person, but
to Dr. Ian Malcolm, he said, "Wow, you became like a capitalist to a naturalist in 4 years, right?" That was the joke, and he did learn
yeah,
his
for
lesson.
sure.
He learned his lesson, and you got to respect him for that. And he did try to save the dinosaurs on the island, create a preserve or whatever, and it kind of backfired. Do they go to Site B in the third one, or do they go back to the main island of the third one?
I think they go back to the main one in the third one, if I'm remembering the third one correctly. But I mean, that movie is just it's like 90 minutes, so they very much get to the heart of the matter much faster, even though it's very much a B movie. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about this. Like, I think it's a very mixed bag in terms of what I enjoyed and what I got out of it. So, yeah, let's go to strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, Stan Winston, man, he did the visual effects for the original and came back and did this one, and they really like. I think they really did a great job with the Raptors this time and making them different colors, and the way that they shot him at night and the way that they shot him in the tall grass, like that was amazing. And the T-Rexes still look good. I like the Stegosaurus one because I think they didn't even have a Stegosaurus in the first one, and according to the IMDb notes, that a lot of kids wrote to Steven Spielberg saying, "Where's the Stegosaurus?" And yeah, I remember, the whole dinosaur craze because of that. At the time, I think what Dinosaurs was on ABC. So yeah, like this was definitely much a dino heavy time, and the effects, knocked it out of the park. John Williams' score is very much a different score than the first. I don't even think he used the original Jurassic Park theme. Only like maybe 10 to 15 seconds when Vince Vaughn goes into that comms room from that looks like it's the design from the original movie. But I like the darker score because it does sound like more like the King Kong original score where they go with like the drums and stuff like that because it's that island feel and the way that it's kind of like low tone and more dramatic because you don't like basically the idea is you don't know what's coming on this island like from left or right, and that kind of reflects in the music. So I thought John Williams did a great job in terms of that. Great performances, all around, except maybe Julianne Moore was definitely having fun. I know you're on the fence about the Vanessa character. But I thought, even if you think that, Ian Malcolm is a different person than he was in the first movie, he's still doing a good job in this movie. And he's like leading the audience all the way through and being that anchor for the audience. And even though there's some weird like goofs and stuff like that, like if he's on that, high tower thing to get away from the T-Rex and he goes down, like what, he's dropping 40 feet to the ground hard. You know what I mean? Like some of that logic kind of goes out the window or whatever, but it's still fine. He puts on a great performance. Very good cinematography. It's not Dean Cundey. He was actually directing something at the time. I have it in the
Dean
notes.
Cundey, Brian.
Cund-
How dare you mispronounce his
Sorry,
name?
sorry. I mispronounce names all the time, but it's fine. Yeah, he was doing Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves, actually. So they got Janice Kaminsky to come in, and he wanted that darker tone, and I think it works because this is definitely a darker type movie than the first, and I think the colors worked well for a natural kind of look. You know what I mean? It worked really well. And I think the strength of this one is that you get way more dinosaur action than the first movie, and it's just so like, oh my god, this is happening. Oh my god, this is happening, and all this crazy dinosaur stuff happens. And I think, unfortunately, the Kingdom movies kind of lean more into that and take those kind of lessons, maybe the wrong kind of lessons from this movie. But I did love the fact that it was a lot more dinosaur action, and I thought it was the right mix with the tone and the editing and the pacing. And then, of course, the King Kong 1933 vibes, which is I'm all about. So all that stuff works for me. Is that kind of what the general consensus is for you? Because I know you just don't like the story pretty much, right?
I mean, I certainly don't disagree with you on any of the strengths. I think the dinosaurs look just as good as the first one. I think the score works, even though it's very different from the first movie. I mean, the performances, I think I'm a little bit more mixed on. I think they're okay in a lot of cases. Whereas in the first one, I think the performances across the board are pretty much unimpeachable. But in this one, the whole corporate angle, I just think, again, because it's more pronounced, I think you get a lot more cliched characters. But I mean, I think Jeff Goldblum is doing everything he can to make this movie good. But yeah, I think I'm a little bit more mixed on the performances. But the cinematography is solid. The dinosaur action is solid. And again, if you love monster movies, you will like this movie. I am not as big of a fan of them. So the King Kong 1933 vibes don't do as much for me. I will say, in terms of the weaknesses, I think we are much more aligned.
Yeah, so it does have more dinosaur action and less story, but when it comes to a Spielberg movie, that's a weakness because Spielberg is all about doing a great story with great character arcs. There's not a lot of great character arcs in this. It's just a lot of action, and that's why he was probably like frustrated by the end of the filming that he was just doing like a lot of like heavy action stuff, and that's probably why he left the franchise. But that's kind of what the weakness is for, because like I said, like Spielberg loves telling a great story, but this doesn't have a great story to it. It just has a lot of great action sequences. And then, the reduced roles for Attenborough, that probably was because of his physical state, and reducing the kids' roles. And you talked about not wanting to torture him again, and I get that, but I think they would have been great to have in the third act as like some help or something like that, because they see, like, I can imagine them seeing the TV and then calling like someone and then like joining up to help the fight or whatever to get the T-Rex there because they've had that experience. And that would be kind of like a redemption. That would have been a redemption for them because they were attacked by a T-Rex. So I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity. And then, unnecessary characters. I mentioned Peter Stormare, and some of those other characters were not really even necessary. Even like the helper to Pete Postlewaite's character, like he was not even necessary, even though it affected him emotionally when he died. That was like the only reason he was there. But a lot of those characters you just didn't even need. And then seeing Peter Stormare get killed by those baby dinosaurs was cool, but totally not anything to do with the plot or story at all. It was just there. And no Sam Neill, no Laura Dern. That's unfortunate. I think they would have helped even if they didn't want to take them to the island. I think even bringing them back for the third act would have been kind of cool too. But just some missed opportunities. And I think the story is just kind of like the main, weakness that kind of like leads to other problems within the movie. And that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I just think this movie needed to be better organized. And I think the fact that they added in so much at the last minute, I think it really hurts. And I think that's why this movie fundamentally just doesn't work as well as the first one. And yeah, I think we're aligned on the weaknesses. I also think we're aligned on the MVP and best performance as well.
Yeah, definitely Steven Spielberg for, he was frustrated, man, but at least they held it together and had fun with it by the end of it, adding that third act that is completely out of nowhere, but it's fine because it has a fun feeling to it. Best performance, Pete Postlewaite as Roland. My God, as the second coming of Quint. Just an amazing job, and he passed away, I think, in 2010 or something like that, which is unfortunate because I think one of the last things I remember him was Inception, and I remember him being good at that too for like the 5 minutes he was in it. And then, underrated, I say yes, but do you think it's underrated, Jerome?
I do not think it's underrated. Unfortunately, it's a huge success. The thing is that this movie is a huge financial success. This movie made $670 million, so it almost doesn't matter what I think. But in terms of looking at Jurassic Park, I am somebody who believes that every single sequel after the first one is a giant mistake. And again, this is a hugely profitable franchise, so it doesn't matter what I think because capitalism has already won. But I just don't think any of the Jurassic Park sequels have been good. I mean, if I were to be, the fundamental thing for me is that I would much prefer to watch Jurassic Park 3. I would probably say this movie is quote unquote better, but I would much rather watch Jurassic Park 3 than watch this movie.
Weird, because I just never want to watch Jurassic Park 3 again. I tried to watch it again last year, and after 10 minutes, I was like, I'm done. I don't know what it is, man, but it just feels like maybe it's because it's like the plot of a different movie. It feels like a plot of a different movie shoehorned into the Jurassic Park world. But again, like, because you could have just had any movie about a couple looking for their lost son on an island that he was like, lost in, that doesn't necessarily have to have dinosaurs. You know what I mean? So that's kind of my thing about Jurassic Park 3, but maybe a different discussion for another time. Maybe in the sequel to this journey, underrated sequels too. We may talk about that. I don't know. But in terms of like ranking the Jurassic Park movies, it's the first one, this one, and then Jurassic World, and everything else is on like shit level for me. So it's just those three movies, and this is definitely the number 2 on my list. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. Any final thoughts?
Not really, but so because it's just weird how this all worked out, that you have 4 of the first 5 movies because we're going in chronological order, and I ended up with the last 3. And next week's movie is our only animated sequel, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do with my picks, I wanted to pick different genres. Like the first week I did comedy, second week I did horror, this week I'm doing action adventure. Next is animation, and I'm not going to reveal the title, but I was kind of shocked when I had this conversation with a buddy of mine who's 7 years younger than me, same age as my brother, and he says, is like, yeah, this is the best one out of the series. And I'm like, what? You mean the first one? He's like, no, this one. And I'm like, what? And I'm like looking this up, and apparently, I don't know if it's like I think it is a generational thing. I think it's people under 30 right now that saw this movie when it first came out of the theaters in 2004. That's all I'm going to reveal, that they were like, wow, this is a classic. And I'm looking this up, and if you look this up on Google, you'll find a lot of articles stating that this movie is better than the original. And growing up, I used to think the original was the absolute original best classic. But we'll find out next week, because apparently this is a whole different thing for a different generation, because it affects them differently. And I'm going to do some research as to why, but I don't know what it is. But I definitely love the first one more. But let's see if that changes next week. So
I would say I am agnostic to the franchise overall.
And considering that they just released another movie within that franchise last month as of this recording, so that's going to be interesting as well. Next week is my final pick for the journey, but it's going to be fun because we get to talk about a certain actor or two that we may have talked about before, and the legacy of one actor and what he's doing today. But yeah, that's kind of it for this week, and that's kind of the preview for next week. But overall, I want to give Jurassic The Lost World 7.5 out of 10. As a 7.5 out of 10 movie, I've watched it so many times, yet I still enjoy it. It has a lot of flaws, but I still love it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, that nostalgic kind of point of view. So thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Just like with The Lost World, our podcast also creates lots of running and screaming.